Amidst all that are the stories of Rome's beginnings almost 3,000 years ago in the lush hills of central Italy. When the Mediterranean sailors of ancient Greece and Egypt looked west toward Italy, they stared into a great unknown. It was 800 years before the birth of Christ, and Rome still didn't exist. But stories were told of mysterious peoples with strange, exotic customs and untold riches. The tales were irresistible. Setting off from the great civilized cities of the East like Athens and Tyre, adventurous Greek traders sailed west into uncharted seas. Navigating by the stars, without instruments, they began to explore a remote and little-known peninsula of the Western Mediterranean. They called it Hesperia, the land of the evening sun.
Well, in the 8th century BC, time of westward expansion, Phoenicians going west, Greeks going west, founding colonies. Well, when the Greeks sailed into Italy, they found something they didn't expect, an advanced civilization already there.
Here in the hills of Tuscany, there were already walled cities. There were kings and high priests. There were skillful craftsmen who created a tender and sensuous art like no other in the Mediterranean. And there were traders ready to barter the finest gold and ironwork the ancient world had ever seen. Before Rome, there were the Etruscans. They taught the Romans everything, but left no written records.
Incredible. The Etruscans were some of the most amazing artisans that the West has ever seen. They worked in metal for sculpture. They worked in terracotta and life-size statues with these amazing, inviting expressions. Very warm. They're not cold and distant, but they're people that you want to meet.
The Etruscans lived in the fertile hills of Tuscany. But their real wealth lay underground, the richest deposits of iron ore, copper, and tin in the central Mediterranean. As early as 700 BC, they created shafts, tunnels, subterranean. The change began with the Romans, who grew up in their shadow. The first Romans were primitive, tough backwoodsmen. People, the Etruscans were rigidly divided by class. Brutal rituals enforced the power and prestige of the nobility. Etruscans staged games at the funerals of important men. The losers were killed. Their blood celebrated the prestige of the dead man and was an offering to his spirit. The wrestlers were slaves captured in warfare. Their lives were worth nothing. Only their deaths were significant. The practice of human sacrifice was common in the ancient world. The Etruscans were no exception. The blood of slaves and captives watered the ground at state rituals throughout the Mediterranean. Romans inherited the Etruscan taste for sacrificial blood. Gladiatorial combat was the Roman equivalent of these gory celebrations of power. Rome took everything from the Etruscans. Etruscan engineers showed them how to drain the marshes where Rome now stands and channel the water into underground sewers. Etruscan architects and builders laid out the Roman Forum as a public square in the 7th century BC. Though Romans owed everything to the Etruscans, they would one day turn on them, crush their beautiful cities, and defame their memory. It would be the first step on Rome's path to empire. Most of what we know about the birth of Rome comes from the work of one man, one of Rome's greatest historians, Livy. He lived in the reign of the Emperor Augustus, over 700 years after the city was founded. The glory of Rome was at its height, but Romans were already haunted by the specter of decline. The empire was emerging from decades of civil war. Bitterness and political intrigue were rampant. Decadence, greed, and profiteering were the order of the day. To men like Livy, raised on the Roman Stoic virtues of valor, loyalty, and self-sacrifice, it seemed the spirit of Rome was rotting.
I feel that indulgence has brought us, through every form of sensual excess, to be morbidly attracted to death in all its forms. Rome is at the dark dawning of an age in which we can neither endure our vices nor face the remedies needed to cure them. Livy.
A cure was what Emperor Augustus was looking for. He cracked down on dissent and passed laws to punish immorality. He was determined to reform the empire and force a return to Roman family values. Bawdy poets like Ovid, who wrote The Art of Love, were banished to...
Livy saw in Augustus, or in Octavian, a chance for the world to finally settle down and get back to business. What made Rome great to begin with? You've got to go back and look. Who were the heroes of the past that made Rome the city she was?
I hope that history may be the best cure for a sick mind. At least it can remind us of what we once were and show us the depths to which we are now sinking.
Livy set out to write a brief history of early Rome, celebrating its glories and virtues, propaganda for the reforms of Augustus. What he had to go on were stories handed down over the centuries. They were a mixture of fact and legend.
I, for one, am looking forward to absorbing myself in antiquity, because I am so deeply tired of the modern world and all the troubles which torment it. Livy.
He believed Rome's mythological beginnings would reveal the stories of heroism and nobility Romans needed to hear. But the stories of Rome's origins were short on Stoic virtues and long on murder, rape, mayhem, and fratricide. To his dismay, Livy discovered they echoed the cruel realities of the Roman world of his own day. Legends told that Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus, twins who were cast into the wilderness to die. But the boys were said to be saved by a she-wolf who suckled them. They grew up like savages in the woods. When they returned to found the city of Rome, they were filled with the simple, ferocious spirit of their wolf mother. According to legend, Romulus and Remus then led their people to the bend in the river Tiber, where she found them. There Rome was born. The year was 753 BC. But hardly had they founded the city than the two brothers quarreled over who should be king. It was left to the augurs to decide. Augurs were the priests of early Rome who divined the will of the gods. They studied the movements of birds, the weather, the entrails of sheep before making their pronouncements, known as the auguries. The augurs placed each brother on a hilltop, then waited. When birds flocked over Romulus, they knew he would be the first king of Rome. But Remus refused the augury, and the brothers fought. Romulus killed him. The first king of Rome, suckled by a wolf, bathed in his brother's blood, walked away furious and triumphant. It was a fitting augury for the bloodshed and strife that lay ahead.
The story about Romulus killing his twin brother at the moment of the founding of the city is a very old story. It's very, very remarkable that in the late Republic, the Romans were fighting civil wars, and of course, it didn't escape their notice that this seemed to be prefigured in the myth with Romulus killing his brother. They actually thought this was a sort of curse on them, that they were fated to destroy each other.
Well, the whole Roman psyche was based on violence. If you look at the foundation legends of Romulus and Remus, that's based on fratricide, right? One brother kills another to found a city. And from that point, it just escalates.
The violence of the early Romans, in fact and fiction, was born of desperation. In real life, shunned by neighboring tribes, Rome was forced to welcome outcasts, vagrants, and fugitives. And they lured their neighbors, the Sabines, to a ritual of peacemaking.
And they're all a pretty desperate lot. And Rome, the earliest community that is organized in that way, of course, is a place where no woman wants to go. So they haven't got any women, that's the first problem.
And so the Romans, Romulus in particular, got an idea. New religious festival, let's invite the neighbors. Bring your wife and kids, especially the daughters.
The Sabines were wary, but accepted. As the festivities went on into the night, the Sabines relaxed their guard. It was what the Romans were waiting for. Romulus gave the sign and they attacked. They grabbed the women and drove off the Sabine men, the ones they didn't kill. When painters of a later age portrayed the rape of the Sabine women, they imagined a classical city. They were wrong. The early Romans were primitive people struggling desperately to survive. The grim stories of the first Romans were as surprising to Livy as they are to us. They certainly didn't provide the role models he was looking for. His little book turned into one of the most monumental histories ever written. By the time he died in 17 AD, it had grown to 142 volumes, all written laboriously in wax. It had